I am totally in support of the right of citizens in Washington to be able to have representation through elected representatives. And now what I would like to do is yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Jamie Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Welch, for that. I appreciate it. We've just heard from several of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle about how Democrats win elections in the District of Columbia by 90% or 92% or what have you, as if we should all understand that the implication of that is constitutionally relevant, that because it's a lopsided in favor of one party, that those people shouldn't be represented in Congress. The Supreme Court rejected precisely this logic in a decision called Carrington versus Rash in 1965, where military service members were disenfranchised actually in Texas on the theory that they did not know if they were stationed in Texas for several years, they didn't really know the local political culture. And the Supreme Court said nothing could be more in tension with the Constitution than the idea that we keep people from voting by virtue of the way we expect them to vote, that we try to gerrymander the electorate to keep people from voting based on the predicted ideology of how they would vote. Perhaps I could go back to Mr. Wingo, who fought for the country and is working with veterans apparently to fight for statehood. What do you make of all these arguments that the District of Columbia is too democratic to be admitted into the Union?
Thank you, Congressman Raskin. What I make of it is, I agree with you. This is irrelevant as far as the Constitution is concerned. And one, I want to thank Representative Holmes Norton for a tireless fight, and as a fellow Yale law grad, what she said about the Constitution. What I think is the founders would point to the fact that if veterans, for those who wanted to fight for their nation, as happened out of Maryland, the history of the Baltimore Independent Company, 400, who George Washington himself said, we must not forget what these 400 men did. And they included 3 blacks. And so I would say, sir, is that the party affiliation, it's more about people and about those who are committed to serve democracy and are willing to die for that.
In the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson spoke of the consent of the governed as being an organizing principle for the country, along with the unalienable rights of the people. But the consent of the governed is at the heart of it. The first 3 words of the Constitution are "we the people," and that, of course, included people who lived in the area that is now the District of Columbia, although it was not that when the Constitution was written. Why do you think we're getting all of these arguments that are doing everything that they can to run away from the consent of the governed? You know, there are no car dealerships in Washington, D.C. The last set of hearings we had, they were talking about parking privileges and how members of Congress might not have the same parking privileges if the new state were created. I was just chastised by one of our colleagues who I'm not quite sure I totally understood the argument, but he was basically saying that it's illegitimate to record the actual history of race and religion and partisanship being used against people trying to attain the level of political equality through statehood admission. Mayor Bowser, would you agree from your study of it that race and religion and partisanship have almost always been turned into factors against the major principle which should be in play, which is the consent of the governed?
Absolutely, Congressman, and thanks for that question. And I was interested in the earlier question about the role of race in the history of D.C. suffrage, self-government, and now the movement for statehood. In fact, 2 historians have written about it extensively, and I commend it to the committee to read Chocolate City. It's a big volume. If you don't have the time to read that, you can read a recent report by D.C.'s Federal City Council, and the Federal City Council is one of our preeminent business organizations. But they commissioned a report as well called Democracy Deferred, Race Politics in D.C.'s 2-century struggle for full voting rights. The truth is that over 220 years, we've had various experience with suffrage for black men, with black men being able to run for office, to it all being stripped away, to having appointed officials, to now the situation where we're at, which is wholly inadequate, which is limited home rule. And what we know with limited home rule, that we don't have representation here in this House. Our Congresswoman cannot vote for a final bill. And when Democrats aren't in power, she hasn't been able to vote in committee. So that's important. But what we've also seen in the last year is that we don't have complete autonomy, that the whims of a leader can impose his will on the people of the District of Columbia, squashing the voices of their elected officials and squashing their laws. That's anti-democratic, and it's un-American, and it has to be fixed now.
Okay. The gentlewoman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. I yield back, Madam Chair.